In 480 BC, the most massive army the world had ever witnessed, commanded by a king who believed himself divinely ordained, descended upon Greece with the intention of destroying the world's first democracy. All that stood between them and total conquest was a narrow mountain passage known as the Hot Gates, and a small Greek force led by 300 of history's most disciplined warriors, the Spartans. This is the account of their legendary final stand, a battle that would resonate through the ages as an enduring symbol of bravery in the face of overwhelming adversity. But what truly transpired at Thermopylae? And how did this handful of men alter the trajectory of Western civilization? To fully grasp what occurred at Thermopylae, we need to turn back the clock roughly a decade to 490 BC on the plains of Marathon. It was there that the first Persian invasion of Greece, commanded by King Darius the Great, was stunningly and humiliatingly defeated. A smaller but highly motivated Athenian-led force routed the Persian troops, forcing them into a hasty retreat. Across the Aegean Sea, for Darius, this defeat was an unbearable insult. He had attempted to punish Athens for backing a Greek uprising, but instead his empire's prestige lay in ruins. Darius swore vengeance, though he would die before achieving it. That consuming desire for conquest would pass to his son and heir, Xerxes I. Xerxes wasn't merely completing his father's unfinished business. He viewed himself as a divinely appointed sovereign, fated to triumph where his father had fallen short. He was resolved to annihilate the rebellious Greeks once and for all, not simply to punish them, but to incorporate all of Greece into his vast and continuously expanding empire. For 4 years, Xerxes assembled the largest military force the world had ever known. From every region of his sprawling domain, from Mesopotamia to India, from Egypt to Bactria, he conscripted soldiers. The ancient historian Herodotus claimed, "The army numbered in the millions, a figure modern scholars consider wildly inflated." Nevertheless, even more conservative contemporary estimates are staggering, suggesting a land force somewhere between 70,000 and 300,000 soldiers. Supported by a massive fleet of over 1,200 warships. To make this invasion feasible, Xerxes ordered remarkable feats of engineering. He had a canal dug through a peninsula to help his fleet bypass a dangerous coastline. Even more audaciously, he commanded the construction of a bridge made of ships across the Hellespont Strait. A mile-long pontoon bridge that allowed his army to literally walk from Asia into Europe. When a storm destroyed the first bridge, an enraged Xerxes allegedly ordered the water itself to be lashed 300 times and had the original engineers executed. This reveals everything you need to understand about the man leading the invasion. His authority was absolute, and his resources appeared limitless. As word of this terrifying force spread, a wave of dread swept across the Greek city-states. Many northern states, seeing no possibility of resistance, submitted to Persian rule. Greece wasn't a unified nation, but a fragmented collection of rival states, frequently at war with one another. Now confronting total destruction, they faced a choice: submit to the Persian king, or unite and fight for their freedom. In this crisis, a fragile coalition formed, and the command of their land forces fell to the one state everyone acknowledged as the premier military power in Greece: Sparta. You cannot comprehend Thermopylae without understanding Sparta. Sparta was truly exceptional in ancient Greece. Cities like Athens were experimenting with democracy, philosophy, and the arts. Sparta was perfecting one singular deadly craft: warfare. Their entire society functioned as a machine designed to produce the world's finest soldiers. This system was called the agoge. For a Spartan male, life was dictated by the state from birth. Elders examined newborns, and any infant judged weak or flawed was abandoned on a hillside to perish. Survival was the first test. At age 7, boys were removed from their families and entered the agoge, a brutal state-sponsored training program that continued for more than a decade. They learned reading and writing, but the primary curriculum emphasized survival, discipline, and combat. They lived in barracks and were intentionally underfed to encourage them to steal food, a valuable Skill for military campaigns. If caught, they were severely punished, not for stealing but for the incompetence of being discovered. They were taught to endure extreme pain without flinching, to obey any command without hesitation, and to value Sparta's welfare above their own lives. Their training was relentless, focused on peak physical conditioning, weapon proficiency, and the intricate movements of the phalanx formation. Spartan culture was renowned for its brief, clever remarks, which we now call laconic phrases. Courage was the supreme virtue, cowardice the deepest shame. Soldiers who fled from combat were branded as outcasts, shunned by everyone. The fear of that social death was often more powerful than the fear of dying in battle. Even Spartan women were unique in Greece. They were educated, participated in athletics, and enjoyed a level of independence that was unprecedented in other cities. Their primary responsibility was to raise strong sons for Sparta. A famous Spartan saying has mothers instructing their sons to return from battle either with your shield or on it, meaning return victorious or die trying. As a fleeing soldier would have discarded his heavy shield, this is the system that forged King Leonidas and his 300 royal bodyguards, men who had been hardened in the fires of the Agoge and who embodied the Spartan ideal. So as Xerxes' colossal army advanced south, the Hellenic League, the Greek alliance, had to devise a strategy. The Athenian general Themistocles, a brilliant tactician, proposed a coordinated land and sea operation. The concept was to block the Persian army at a narrow pass while simultaneously stopping the Persian navy at a narrow strait. This would prevent the fleet from outflanking and resupplying the land army. The location they selected for the land defense was a pass named Thermopylae, which means hot gates in Greek, named for the local sulfur springs. Geographically, this was an inspired choice. In 480 BC, the pass was an extremely narrow corridor, perhaps only 100 meters wide, compressed between steep mountains and the sea. This terrain would serve as a force multiplier, neutralizing the Persians' greatest advantage, their enormous numbers, and forcing them into a brutal head-on confrontation on equal terms. The task of holding this pass fell to one of Sparta's kings, Leonidas. But there was a complication. The invasion was occurring during two of the most sacred Greek festivals, the Olympic Games and Sparta's own festival of Carnia. During the Carnia, Spartan law strictly prohibited any military action. Caught between sacred law and the literal destruction of their world, the Spartan elders devised a compromise. They couldn't dispatch the entire army, but they would permit Leonidas to march north immediately with his personal bodyguard of 300 men. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were elite veterans handpicked by Leonidas. Herodotus adds a haunting detail. Leonidas specifically selected men who already had sons to ensure their family lines wouldn't be extinguished. This suggests Leonidas understood this might be a one-way journey. Before departing, Leonidas consulted the oracle at Delphi, the most revered spiritual authority in Greece. The oracle's prophecy was both ominous and cryptic. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta, of the wide spaces. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus' sons, or, if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles. The message was unmistakable. Either Sparta itself would fall or a Spartan king must die. For a man like Leonidas, steeped in the Spartan code of duty and sacrifice, the choice was inevitable. He marched north to meet his fate, gathering allies along the way. By the time he reached Thermopylae, the Greek force numbered around 7,000 men, a mixture of Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and others. It was a minuscule force to confront an imperial juggernaut. But at the narrow hot gates, they would make their stand. When the Greeks arrived at Thermopylae, they immediately began preparing their defense. They rebuilt an ancient wall, the Phocian wall that blocked the narrowest section of the pass, and positioned their men behind it. The core of this army was the hoplites, the heavily armored infantry of ancient Greece. A hoplite was a tank of the ancient world. He wore a bronze breastplate, bronze leg guards, and the iconic Corinthian helmet that covered his entire head. His primary weapon was a long spear called a dory. For close-quarters combat, he carried a short sword, the xiphos. But his most crucial piece of equipment was the hoplon, a large, round shield of wood and bronze that protected him from neck to knee. Hoplites fought in a formation called the phalanx. They stood shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their shields to create a solid wall of bronze. The men in the first few ranks extended their long spears forward, creating a deadly forest of spear points. A disciplined phalanx, especially in a confined space where it couldn't be flanked, was nearly impenetrable. This was the wall Leonidas planned to use to halt the Persian army. Soon the Persian army arrived, a sea of men and horses stretching as far as the eye could perceive. King Xerxes established his throne on a nearby hill to observe the battle. For 4 days he did nothing. He simply waited. He genuinely couldn't believe this tiny group of soldiers would actually defy him. He dispatched a messenger demanding their surrender. According to the historian Plutarch, Leonidas's response was famously concise: "Milan lab, come and take them." Xerxes was convinced the mere sight of his army would make the Greeks flee. But the Greeks didn't budge. They calmly oiled their bodies, performed athletic exercises, and combed their long hair. A Spartan tradition before a battle they knew they might not survive. Xerxes' patience finally broke. On the 5th day, he ordered the attack. The battle commenced not with a charge, but with a storm of arrows. Xerxes commanded his archers to fire, and Herodotus famously recorded that the arrows were so numerous they blocked out the sun. It was then that the Spartan Leonidas supposedly made his legendary remark, "Good, then we will have our battle in the shade." The Greeks simply raised their heavy shields, creating a shell of bronze that easily deflected the arrows. Frustrated, Xerxes sent in his first wave of 10,000 infantry, the Medes and Scythians, ordering them to capture the Greeks and bring them to him alive. The wave crashed against the Spartan shield wall. Result was a slaughter. The Persian infantry, with shorter spears and wicker shields, were completely outmatched. Their shields shattered against the bronze hoplons, and their spears were too short to reach the Greeks. The Greeks, meanwhile, methodically thrust forward from the safety of their phalanx. For the Persians, it was like running into a meat grinder. As men in the front fell, they were trampled by the ranks behind them. The pass was quickly choked with bodies. The Greeks, fighting in shifts to stay fresh, held their ground without yielding an inch. Watching from his throne, Xerxes was furious. He had hurled thousands of his men at the Greeks, and they'd been repelled with horrific casualties, while Greek losses were minimal. The first day was a complete disaster for the Persians and a stunning success for Leonidas. They had demonstrated that in the narrow confines of the hot gates, superior training and equipment could defy impossible odds. But the day wasn't finished, and Xerxes was about to deploy his best as the first day ended. A fuming Xerxes decided it was time to send in his elite forces. He summoned his personal royal guard, the legendary force the Greeks called the Immortals. This was a corps of 10,000 of the finest warriors in the Persian Empire. It's called Immortals because if a soldier was killed or fell ill, he was immediately replaced, creating the illusion of an invincible, undying unit. These were professional soldiers, better armed than the regular infantry. They were a fearsome sight marching into the pass, their armor gleaming. Xerxes was certain that where the others had failed, his Immortals would succeed. He was mistaken. The Immortals attacked the Greek line with disciplined ferocity, but the outcome was identical. They couldn't break the phalanx. During the fighting, the Greeks introduced a new tactic: the feigned retreat. The phalanx would pretend to break and flee, luring the Persians into a disorganized chase. Then, on signal, the Greeks would suddenly turn, form their shield wall instantly, and slaughter the surprised and overextended enemy. Herodotus says that Xerxes literally leaped from his throne 3 times in frustration as he watched even his most elite troops get cut to pieces. The pass was a slaughterhouse filled with the bodies of his best men. By the end of the second day, the Persians had suffered thousands of casualties, while the Greek line remained unbroken. The morale of the Persian army was plummeting. It appeared the Greek position was impregnable. For 2 full days, approximately 7,000 men had held off an army of over 100,000. Leonidas' strategy was working flawlessly. But as the Greeks rested, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man whose name would become synonymous with betrayal for all of history. The man's name was Ephialtes. He was a local who knew the mountains around Thermopylae intimately. Promised a substantial reward by the Persian king, he went to Xerxes' camp with a secret that would seal the fate of the 300 Spartans. A hidden mountain trail, the Thermopylae, path that went around the pass and emerged behind the Greek position. The truth is, Leonidas knew about this path. He'd stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers on the mountain to guard it. Xerxes, seizing on this betrayal, immediately sent his general, Hydarnes, and the elite immortals to follow Ephialtes along the trail under cover of darkness. The Persians marched through the night. As dawn broke, they encountered the Phocian guards. According to Herodotus, the rustling of leaves from the advancing army was the first warning the Phocians received. After a volley of Persian arrows, the Phocians, believing they were the primary target, retreated up the mountain to make a stand. This was a fatal error. The Persians weren't interested in them. They simply bypassed them and continued down the path to get behind Leonidas. A Phocian messenger raced down the mountain to inform Leonidas of the devastating news. They were about to be surrounded. The position was no longer defensible. Battle was lost. Leonidas immediately called a council. With Persians about to attack from the front and rear, the army faced certain annihilation. Most of the allied commanders advocated for an immediate retreat to preserve the army to fight. Another day, Leonidas agreed. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek army, ordering them to escape while they could. This wasn't surrender. It was a strategic decision. The stand was always intended to be a delaying action, and by holding the pass for over 2 days and making the Persians pay dearly for every inch in blood, they had already succeeded. The most important thing now was for the rest of the army to escape and continue the fight. But Leonidas wasn't leaving. For a Spartan king, retreating was an unthinkable disgrace. He was bound by Spartan law and the oracle's prophecy. He and his 300 Spartans would remain. It would be the rear guard, holding the pass to cover their allies' retreat and fulfill their destiny. They weren't entirely alone. In a moment of extraordinary heroism that often gets overlooked, the entire contingent of 700 soldiers from the city of Thespia, led by their commander Thermopylae, voluntarily chose to stay and die with the Spartans. Their sacrifice was a powerful testament to their courage. The 400 Thebans, however, are believed to have surrendered to the Persians during the final stand instead of fighting to the death. Some Spartan helots, servants, were also likely present. So the rear guard was set: 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, who mostly surrendered or were compelled to stay, along with some Spartan helots, perhaps 1,500 men in total, against the full might of the Persian army. Knowing the end was imminent, Leonidas reportedly told his men to eat a hearty breakfast because that night they would dine in the underworld. When the final assault began, the Greeks didn't wait behind their wall. They advanced into the wider section of the pass, determined to kill as many Persians as possible. What followed was pure, desperate violence. The remaining Greeks fought with a fury born of resolve. Herodotus writes that when their spears broke, they fought with their swords. When their swords shattered, they fought with their hands and their teeth. Leonidas fell in the heart of the battle in a vicious fight erupted over his body. Eventually, the sheer number of Persians was too much. The Greeks were pushed back to a small hill where they made their final stand. Surrounded on all sides, they were finally overwhelmed by a storm of Persian arrows. By the end, virtually every last Spartan and Thespian lay dead. The hot gates had fallen. On the surface, Thermopylae was a clear victory for Persia. The path to southern Greece was open, and Xerxes' army marched south, burning the evacuated city of Athens. In a final fit of rage, Xerxes had Leonidas' body decapitated and crucified, an act considered barbaric even by the standards of the time, but their sacrifice was anything but meaningless.
Strategically, the 3-day delay gave the Greek allies
precious time to prepare for the next phase of the war. A few weeks later, at the naval battle of Salamis, The Greek fleet under Themistocles lured the larger Persian navy into narrow straits, just like at Thermopylae, and won a devastating victory. The following year at the Battle of Plataea, a unified Greek army, inspired by the heroism at Thermopylae, crushed what remained of the Persian land forces, ending the invasion permanently. But the true legacy of Thermopylae extends far beyond. Military strategy. It became a legend almost immediately. Was a massive propaganda victory for the Greeks, boosting morale and forging a sense of unity that had never existed before. It became an eternal symbol of courage against insurmountable odds, of sacrifice for a greater good, and of the refusal to bow to tyranny. After the war, a stone lion was erected at Thermopylae to honor King Leonidas. Famous epitaph attributed to the poet Simonides was carved on a stone to commemorate the 300 "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." For 2.5 millennia, the story of the 300 Spartans has inspired soldiers, leaders, and artists. It's been retold in poems, books, and the famous graphic novel and movie 300, which, while taking considerable artistic liberties, captured the raw, heroic spirit of the legend. Thermopylae is the ultimate reminder that history isn't only written by the winners. It's also shaped by the moral power of those who refuse to back down even when they lose. It's a story that proves a small group of determined people can change the world, and that some defeats are so glorious they become immortal. The sacrifice at the hot gates wasn't an ending, but a beginning. It was the spark that ignited the fires of Greek resistance and ultimately helped preserve a culture that laid the groundwork for Western civilization. If you want to explore more legendary last stands and pivotal moments in history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Let us know in the comments which epic battle from history you'd like to see us cover next. Thank you for watching.